In this fast-paced world, it often seems impossible to balance what the Bible says about health and wholeness with the latest scientific information. With the help of these experts, Dr. Caroline Leaf, Dr. Janet McCarroll, and personal trainer Marty Copeland, you can begin the first steps toward health and emotional wholeness in relating to the mind, body, and spirit in this inspiring and informative series, Your Body, His Temple. Now, let's join Dr. Caroline Leaf for Session 1, Your Amazing Brain.
It's great to be here with you tonight, all the way from South Africa. I was here in April and I loved it so much that I came back. In front of me here, I have got two brains. This is the female brain and this is the male brain. It must be because that's pink and that's grey. But actually the male brain's bigger than the female brain, and it's not anything to do with them being more intelligent, because it's not about size, it's about connections. And the only reason the male brain is bigger than the female brain is because they're basically bigger, but it's all packed in, condensed. The female brain's a little bit more densely packed, and that's why the female brain's slightly smaller to fit into our smaller frame. But having said that, I'm going to be taking you on a journey over the next 4 sessions, teaching you about how your brain works. In the first session, I'm going to cover all the facts about the brain, your amazing brain, telling you the truth, because we've been really misled when it comes to understanding the human brain. So the first session will be about your amazing brain. Then I'm going to talk about thinking, thought, what thought is, how thought forms, how it becomes toxic, and how you are in control of your thoughts. How thoughts are something that you actually, I'm going to show you thoughts, I'm going to show you strongholds, I'm going to show you toxic thinking, I'm going to show you exactly how you can actually control the thought process. I'm going to show you things like where free will is in your brain. I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like inside your brain as a stronghold forms as well, negative and positive. Then we're going to talk about stress. And stress, that's the third session. This stress is our body's reaction to toxic thinking. It's how our body will translate what we're feeling in our brain. Our thought life is translated into a stress reaction in our body. And there's different levels of stress. You get good and you get bad stress. And then finally, the fourth session, we're going to talk about the 13 steps to detoxing. So I'm going to build you up through giving you knowledge about the brain, about how thought forms, how it becomes toxic, the stress reaction to toxic thinking, and then I'm going to leave you with 13 steps on how to actually detox your brain, which is really important, so you'll know how to actually go and apply these things. To make it easier, I'm going to use a lot of slides to help you to understand all the different things that I'm going to be telling you. But just to start off with, Galileo had a great mind, Einstein a genius mind, Newton an extraordinary mind, Bill Gates a brilliant mind, you and me, never mind, we've got the looks. So now you can de-stress, because the minute people see a brain and look at a brain and hear about the brain, they think they can't understand the brain. But if you can work your cell phone, you can work your brain. So at the end of this series, you'll be able to understand a lot more about your brain. And as we go through the steps in life and progress through life, having a really clear vision of how your brain works is incredibly helpful in understanding who you are and how you fit into the world. If you could put your 2 fists together, that is the size of your brain. Your brain takes 18 years to grow. So it's actually not very big if you think of it. It weighs around 3 pounds in a female, around 3.5 pounds in a male, and it takes around 18 years to grow. So that means that when you are born, your brain is a baby. It's not fully mature until the age of 18, which means that we need to really look after our children and watch what we're doing until the age of 18, because they do not have the brain structures in place to make wise decisions until they're 18. Therefore, that's why we should be guiding our children all the way through, as it says in the Word of God. Standing up, sitting down, lying down, all the time we should be guiding our children. So your brain basically at birth is a small little tiny brain, and it grows for 18 years. And as it grows, it matures and gets more and more involved. And that process I'm going to be explaining to you as we go through these series. Now, when your brain is the only organ in your body that doesn't age, it actually matures. Now, maturing means getting better. So therefore, the oldest person in the room here tonight and the oldest person watching me tonight has got the wisest brain. So some of the most recent research has told us that we've been led to believe that as you get older, your brain actually gets worse and that nerve cells die. I'm sure you've all heard that. But that's not actually the truth, because a lot of that research was done on diseased brains. So the good news is that the older you get, the better your brain gets. So with maturity and with use, with correct use, your brain should get better and better. However, a lot of us don't get the full potential out of our brain because we're not actually using our brains correctly. And what they found is that 95% of people worldwide do not know how to use their brain. Only around about 5% use their brain correctly. And of those 5%, they say around about 3.5% will go on to some form of tertiary education. And of that 3.5%, around about 1% will actually successfully complete their tertiary education and go on to be a success in life spiritually, financially, emotionally, etc. Which means that of the 6.7 billion people that are on the planet, we only have around about 60 million people out there that are actually succeeding and using their brains correctly. That is a crazy statistic. If 1% of people out there are using their brain, that means that 99% of people are not using their brain correctly. However, according to the research on the brain, and I've spent 25 years researching the brain now, according to the research, it should be the other way around. Only around about 3 to 5% of people have genuine pathological problems that will inhibit their potential from developing. So why is it that those statistics are reversed? Interestingly enough, 150 years ago, the brain researchers were telling us that if we don't change the way in which we think and the way in which we teach our children and the way in which we are actually using our brain, we are going to land up with a pandemic problem in education by the 20th century. And they couldn't have been more correct. 150 years later, we are sitting with a pandemic problem in education. One of the major problems across the world that the researchers, the educationalists are finding is that students and children and adults don't know how to think. They are not using their brain properly, they are not thinking correctly, and that is exactly what they said 150 years ago. If we don't teach people how to think, we are going to land up with a major problem in our society in 150 years' time. 150 years later, we are facing a situation that by the year 2020, we are going to be in an intellectual dark ages. Now that is scary. If you think that it doesn't make sense, if you think of the fact that we're in the information explosion era and we're supposed to be developing all this knowledge and there's a huge amount of knowledge out there, and yes, knowledge is increasing, but knowledge management, the management of that knowledge is decreasing. So we have an ever widening gap between knowledge and knowledge management. And that issue has come from a lack of not teaching people how to use their brain and how to think correctly. And that has been the focus of my research, the focus of my work, the focus of my books, is to teach people how to understand how the brain works and how to think properly. Because if you don't think properly, your brain becomes toxic. And according to the latest research on the brain, 87% of current physical and mental and intellectual illnesses that we experience as humans comes from our thought life. It's all in your head couldn't have been, when people say it's all in your head, very often they mean it as something derogatory. Oh, it's all in your head, as something negative. That is so true, it is so accurate. 87% of current mental, physical and intellectual illnesses today come from poor thinking habits, incorrect usage of the brain. Your brain is highly sophisticated. It's a muscle, but it's highly sophisticated. And if it's not used properly, it will go into default mode. And yes, as people age, we supposedly are getting worse, but according to the research, we're getting better. But if you don't use your brain, you will then not improve as you mature. And that's unnatural. The natural thing is that the more you use your brain, the more brilliant you become. And I have worked with thousands and thousands of people, reached through the work that I've done, and I've seen the most incredible, from the research that I've done, I've seen that I can stand before you and state statistically that 35, you can expect an improvement in potential performance between 35 to 75%. In other words, you will use your brain 35 to 75% more efficiently if you understand how to think correctly, if you understand the principles of how your brain actually functions. I can guarantee that a 35 to 75% improvement will occur in your actual potential, the way that you perform. And the other very good news is that intelligence is a dynamic thing that constantly develops through your life. We've often been misled, and a lot of people are still under the impression that intelligence is something that's static, it's fixed, it's not something that actually develops, it was preset. By the time you reach age 5, that's it, you're not going to improve after that. And that is not true. Your intelligence develops according to how you determine it to develop. In other words, it's something that develops through your entire lifetime. Intelligence is dynamic, and it goes hand in hand with the development of using your brain correctly. So the more you use your brain, the more you think properly, the more intelligent you become. So intelligence is not fixed. Intelligence depends on you. You obviously have a pre-wired core base that you work from, but the intelligence depends on you. How well you think, how well you use your brain will be how intelligent you become. And the research also shows us that the more intelligent you become, the healthier you become. So intellect and physical health are directly linked. The mind-body connection is absolutely accurate. So let's have a look at the next slide. What lies behind the windows to the mind? Science has debated a lot about whether the mind is out there as some collective unconscious item and the brain is in here, or are they one? And there are two schools of thought, but generally the accepted notion is that the mind and the accepted notion is that the mind and the brain are one. The mind and the brain are one and the same thing. In other words, your brain and your mind or work together as one fixed unit. So what lies behind the windows to the mind? Your brain lies behind the windows to your mind. If you understand your brain, you can actually understand who you are and how your mind functions. And it's not something out there. In the work that I do, I so often get people coming to me and feeling they're like victims, people that feel that they are controlled by their own minds. Meanwhile, your mind is your brain, and if you understand how your brain functions, you learn to use it more effectively, and you can actually control the way in which your mind functions. So the verdict of science is in the brain-mind-body connection is real. The brain, the mind, and the body are all connected. The brain-mind-body connection, they are linked, they are one, they are integrated. So your brain controls your body is neurologically sensitive to your mind. 87% of current illnesses, as I mentioned already, come from the thought life. If you don't actually control the way it all starts and ends in the brain. So if you don't control the way in which your brain functions, your body's going to have a physical reaction to that. What we think will affect us emotionally, physically, intellectually. What lies behind the windows to the mind? It starts with a thought. And the thought will become an emotion, and that emotion will become an attitude, and the attitude will produce a behavior. So if your thoughts become toxic, if your thinking is toxic and disrupted, then what that will produce is a toxic emotion, and that toxic emotion which will produce a toxic attitude, and the toxic attitude will produce a toxic behavior. If we can't understand or reverse that process, we're going to always be a victim and suffering under a toxic mind controlling us. And thinking is something that we can actually learn to control. All of it's controllable. Many years ago, just to take you down on a quick walk down history lane, many years ago the brain wasn't seen as being something that was that important. The brain was seen as something that cooled the blood. In fact, the ancient Egyptians used to remove the brain and scrape it out with long like little sticks and knives, take the brain out, and actually didn't think it was important. So we've gone from appreciating that the brain, or thinking that the brain didn't mean anything, to here in 1949, which wasn't very long ago, they were doing an operation. He's doing a lobotomy where you put an ice pick behind the eyes to actually sever the corpus callosum, which is a part that joins the two sides of the brain. Now that 1949 is not that long ago, and if you have a look at this image, you'll see that they're not wearing gloves, they're not wearing masks. So not that long ago, they were doing this kind of operation, which is completely against what we would the whole natural functioning of the brain. So we've gone from seeing the brain as something that cools the blood to something that actually was something that controlled the seat of the soul, that was something that was important, to something that people felt that they could actually fiddle with to actually change the person's behavior. This kind of operation was done for severe epilepsy, severe depression. Fortunately, this kind of operation is not done anymore. Now, to teach you the truth about how your brain functions, because most of us have been led to believe that there's certain misbeliefs. Whenever I teach about the brain, I always find that people have certain misunderstandings about how the brain actually functions. Now, you've got a left side and you've got a right side of your brain. Most of us have been led to believe that the left side is our logical, linear, analytical, scientific side. Am I right? Most of us believe that. And the right side is our creative, holistic side that kind of sees the big picture, is the arty kind of side. So the academic versus the more arty side. Now, that is completely and utterly incorrect. If you have a look at the puzzle that I've got up on the picture that I've got up on the screen over here, you'll see if you look closely that it's a puzzle. Now, initially, as you looked at it when I put it up on the screen, you would have seen that it was a picture, a photograph. It's actually our eldest daughter. We have 4 children. I use this with permission. She was 18 months then. She's now 16. So now this photograph over here is a puzzle. As you look at that, you'll see the big picture of the puzzle. But if you look closer, deeper, and you start letting the puzzle pieces penetrate into your mind, you'll see that you start looking at the detail to the big picture to the detail. And if you think of how we build a puzzle, what do you do with a puzzle? You take out the big picture and you put it somewhere, then you sort the colors and you sort the corners, and then you take the detail, big picture, detail, big picture, and so you build the puzzle until you've completed it. Now that is exactly how the brain actually actually works, the truth about your brain, is not that the left side is academic and the right side's creative. That's completely unscientific, completely inaccurate, and has led to this pandemic problem that we currently have today, where people can't think and where they have toxic minds producing toxic emotions, producing toxic attitudes, and producing toxic behavior. Part of it stems from the fact that we have had this misunderstanding that the left is academic and the right's creative. The truth about your brain is that both sides of your brain do everything. The left side works from the detail to the big picture, and the right side from the big picture to the detail. So if you are thinking of that, if you think of the concept of a puzzle, you're working from the big picture, detail, detail, big picture. In every single thing that you do, whether you are doing a mathematical calculation, whether you are speaking like I'm speaking now, listening like you're listening now, doing some creative painting, working in whatever environment you work in, both sides of your brain are involved in every single one of those activities. So both, if you're doing maths, the left and the right side do it. If you're doing art, the left and the right side do it. But the left side works from the detail to the big picture, and the right side works from the big picture to the detail. And what we have to do is integrate those two perspectives together, detail to big picture to detail. Let me give you a simple example. If I say 2 times 2 equals 4, that would be how the left brain would process that simple calculation. Left side is detail to big picture. So 2 times 2 equals 4. 2 is the detail, times is the detail, 2 is the detail, 4 is the big picture. At exactly the same time, your right side of your brain would be processing that as 4 equals 2 groups of 2. See, 4 is the big picture, 2 groups of 2. Slightly different perspective, but it's gone from big picture to detail. Now, in order to be able to understand times tables, children, when they're learning that at school, they have to understand that 2 times 2 equals 4 is the same as 4 equals 2 groups of 2. They have to bring those two perspectives together. And if you don't bring those two perspectives together, you're going to have toxic thinking. So in other words, what we want to have is the two sides of the brain working together in harmony and in synergy together. So in other words, you've got a left side and you've got a right side. Left side will be detail to big picture, right side big picture to detail, and the two sides of the brain have to work together. How they work together, I'm going to tell you in a moment. But what happens is that if you don't think correctly, and if you have been exposed, like all of us have been exposed, to the current way of thinking, your brain's not going to be in harmony. It's going to be operating like this. In other words, we're going to be shifting between detail to big picture to detail to big picture to detail. And that out of harmony pattern makes the brain shift down into default mode. It's not good, it's not healthy, it produces toxic thinking, and it will result in the potential of a person not being released correctly. So one of the first things that we have to learn is to get the two sides of the brain working together. Now, I spent 11 years researching thinking to find that thinking was 3 things. I'm going to be explaining a lot about thinking as we move along in this series. But the only way that you can get the two sides to work together is through thinking. So you need to learn how to think again. You may think that you're thinking, but I'm going to teach you exactly how to think and to get the two sides of the brain working together. But this first session, we're going to go into more technical stuff, and you're going to learn about how to think properly as we move through the series. So the two sides have to work together. Now, if there's two sides and the left is detail to big picture and the right is big picture to detail, that must mean that we build a double memory of everything. So absolutely everything that you are building a memory of, which is from birth to death, 24 hours a day. During the day, you actually receive the information, and at night when you're sleeping, your brain is still working and it's sorting out the memories that you've built during the day. So 24 hours a day from birth to death, you are building and sorting memory. But you build a double memory of everything. On the left side, you're going to build a memory detail to big picture, and on the right side, big picture to detail. If you're going to be functioning in a non-toxic way, then the left side and the right side need to be working together, because until you understand that 2 times 2 equals 4 is the same as 4 equals 2 groups of 2, you are never going to be able to do tables. In other words, you have to have both perspectives come together in order to fully be able to actually understand and apply that information in order to get wisdom. Wisdom only comes when we get the two sides of the brain working together and thinking properly, which will bring wisdom in. So now, this brain of yours that weighs 3.5 pounds is made up of different structures. Now, it fills up the skull. It's got 4 different lobes: the parietal, frontal, occipital, and the temporal lobe, and each of those performs a different function. We're going to go into those functions in a lot of detail as we move through the series. But I want you to understand now what your brain's actually made up of. Your brain is made up of nerve cells. So if you have a look on my right, you'll see a nerve cell over there. The top, you'll see the blue part with little things spiking out of it. Those are called dendrites. Those are incredible structures. At the moment, while you're listening to me, you are growing dendrites. If you weren't growing dendrites, you wouldn't be able to process anything that's gone on here this evening already. You wouldn't be able to take in any information. You wouldn't be able to function, because those little blue sparky things called dendrites are the things that will grow to accommodate the new incoming information. Your brain performs 400 billion actions per second, of which you are conscious of 2,000. Okay, which is an incredible thing. Now, those 400 billion actions per second, part of those 400 billion actions is the growing of dendrites. So as you're listening to me now, my words are going out, you're seeing visual images, that is information that's coming into you, and in order for you to take it into your brain and to hold it in your brain, you have to grow dendrites to hold the information. So the information literally lives on dendrites, so therefore that is what memory is. Memory is those little dendrites on the nerve cell. Now your nerve cell looks a bit like your hand. So if you look at, there's the central portion, there's the little dendrites, and then you've got a long thing called the axon. I'm not going into too much technical detail, but all you need to know is that that's more or less what a nerve cell looks like, and with a stretch of the imagination, it also looks a bit like a tree. So if you look at that other image over there, you'll see it looks pretty much like a tree. So basically, I've only got 5 fingers on my hand, but a nerve cell can grow up to 70,000 branches. Now, if you think of it like this, you are growing dendrites for everything that you hear 24 hours a day. Okay, but nighttime you sort them out. Now you are growing, you have a left side of your brain which builds detail to big picture, and you have the right side that builds big picture to detail. You grow a double memory of everything. So as you're listening to me now, you are growing in the left side of your brain detail to big picture, and at the same time, synergistically, it's called topographic inhibition, the right side of your brain is growing the same information but from a different perspective, from the big picture to the detail. So it's like a mirror image. If you look at yourself in the mirror, you see yourself in the mirror. It's the same thing with your brain. You're building this double memory, and it's got to be balanced. As you look in, as the one side looks at the other, it's a mirror image of each other. Now, the way that your brain is designed is that these two perspectives of thought, these two memories that you've built, need to come together and work together in harmony, so that we have harmony and we don't have this out of synergy happening in your brain, which produces toxic thinking. And the way in which we get this harmony, as I said already, is to think correctly. So you really need to learn how to think, which I'm going to teach you. Okay, so now these nerve cells that grow in your brain, these dendrites that grow, they look just like trees, and the more branches that you have on the nerve cell, the more intelligent the memory. So therefore, that would be a more intelligent memory, for example, than that memory, because there are more branches on that memory. But now let's talk about short and long-term memory. As you're listening to me now, the information is going in your brain, you're receiving it through a whole process, and you're growing branches to hold that information. Tomorrow night when you're sleeping, tonight as well, but mainly tomorrow night when you're sleeping, your brain's going to sort this information out. You've got little support cells called glial cells, and those glial cells they support all the nerve cells in your brain, and they sort out your thinking. They prune the branches, and they clean up the branches, and they feed the brain, because any branches that are badly attached will put your brain into a toxic stress state, which is not healthy. So when you're sleeping, these little vacuum cleaner glial cells clean up your brain and help your brain to sort itself out. Now what's left when you wake up the next morning is long-term memory. So short-term memory is what you're hearing now until tomorrow night, while you take it in, while you're building, and the sorting process, and then what's left after that is going to be long-term memory. So it's not another physical location, it's basically what's left on your tree after the 24 to 48 hours. Now, one nerve cell, as I said, can grow up to around about 70,000 branches. That's an enormous amount, and that's what we estimate from the research. It's probably more than that. An average human brain has around about 100 trillion nerve cells. Okay, I don't know how many you've heard, but you have around about 100 trillion nerve cells. So you've got around about 100 trillion of these things, each one able to hold up to around about 70,000 branches. That means that the capacity of your brain would be 100 trillion nerve cells multiplied by the 70,000 branches that you can grow. So that's the amount of storage space you have in your brain. And if you translate that into something easy, what it means is that you've actually got 3 million years worth of space in your brain. 3 million years. Now, I don't know how much of your brain you think you're using, but I'm sorry to tell you, if you haven't been thinking properly, you're only using around about 0.001% of your brain for intellectual performance. Less than 0.001% of your brain for intellectual performance. In your lifetime, if you get up to more than 6 to 8%, that will be unusual. So in your lifetime, you can expect to use around about 6 to 8%, which makes us think on the spiritual level, if God's given us this amazing brain, and we're only going to use around about 6 to 8%, what's the rest for? So to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So he didn't create robots, he created people to have relationships. So he gave us a decent brain to be able to communicate with him once we're in heaven. That's what I believe. But we know, because it's impossible in your lifetime for you to use more, 6 to 8, maybe 10% of your brain for intellectual performance. There just isn't enough time. So what does this all mean? Basically, this is what it looks like inside your brain. All those nerve cells, these 100 trillion nerve cells, as you're listening to me now, you're building on the left side detail to big picture, on the right side big picture to detail, and if you're thinking very hard and thinking properly, the two will be integrating detail to big picture to detail, and you'll be forming and growing a good memory. Now this is what it looks like inside your brain. It's not spaghetti and meatballs, it's your brain, okay? And all the little blobby parts, those are the cell bodies, and then the thick branch like this point over here, that would be dendrites, and this one over here would be an axon. So basically what you have here is a minute portion of your brain magnified many times to show you what it looks like in your head. That is memory. What you're looking at there is memory networks. Now as you are listening to me now, if you think properly, which is the synergy, if you're thinking like this, that's good. If you're thinking like that, that's not so good. If you're thinking like this, what will happen is that the dendrites that you grow onto your trees, or the dendrites that you grow onto your nerve cells, will be very firmly attached. So as you think, drawing the left perspective and the right perspective together and really processing that information deeply, the nerve cells will be very, very firmly attached to the central nerve cell body, and that would be a very strong memory. But if you sort of think and sort of process the information, what will happen is that the branches that you build will start flapping. They actually flap like this. And that is a badly built memory. And that memory is dangerous, because tomorrow night when you're sleeping and those little vacuum cleaner glial cells come along, they will physically remove those flapping branches and place them into the depths. They don't fall out your ears on the pillow at night. They actually get placed into the recesses of the unconscious mind. You've got 3 million years worth of space, you've got a big dustbin there. So whatever you don't process correctly gets placed into the subconscious part of the mind, and that becomes what we call inaccessible memory. So we have the situation, I'm sure you've experienced it, I have too, where I didn't really process something and I went into a situation and I knew something about that, but I didn't have enough access to that memory to be able to write about it or speak about it or use that information in a wise way. Now if you think of intelligence is the ability to use what you're putting in your head. You don't want to just put stuff in your head. You want to be able to put it in and use it again. So in order to be able to use it, your brain has to go through a process of really understanding that information, taking it in, processing that information so that you build that kind of memory and that the two memories work together. That is good. That is healthy. That is toxic thinking. So flapping branches and that out of synergy thinking is very, very toxic. And toxic thinking will produce a stress reaction in your body, and a stress reaction in your body will make you sick, mentally, physically, intellectually. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're sick. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're not functioning our potential. We sometimes just accept the fact that, well, maybe that's just the level of my intelligence. I stand before you today and I tell you that there isn't one single person on this planet who isn't gifted. Every single person is gifted. God didn't make any mistakes. He created you in His image. So if you think of His image, if you're created in His image, then that means that you have an incredible brain, and all you need to do is find out how to use it. And it's a lie from the pit of hell. It's a lie from the enemy that we have been misled about the way in which we can use our brain. Because if people use their brains correctly, they are happy, they are healthy, they are out there, they are prosperous, and people will turn around and say, I'll have what she's having. I'll have what he's having, okay? Because they want to be like you. But if we're walking around under that depression, that anxiety, that worry, that stress, that if we're walking around under those burdens, people won't look to us and say, well, what is it about that person that's different? We should be walking around there in control. And if your brain is working like it should, you feel fantastic. You look fantastic. You feel physically good. And you can get out there and do what God has put you on this earth to do. That's to draw people into his kingdom. People are not drawn to sick, depressed, tired, and anxious people. People are drawn to people with life. And that's what happens when you use your brain. The research has proven, take away from the spiritual side, look at the pure scientific side. If you use your brain properly, you're a happy, healthy person. The move today in medicine is not just to give people medication. Yes, it happens, but it's also to fix their brains. There's a lot of doctors out there, there's a lot of whole wellness clinics that are working with cognitive behavior therapy, or working with get the mind right alongside the medication. Otherwise, the medication is not going to work long term anyway. So it's important that we balance the two. Now, this is just some more slides of what it looks like inside the brain. This over here would be, that over there would be a very good strong memory, and over here we have a glial cell. So that's the cleaning up cell that will go in and prune all of these little flapping branches. So as you're building those memories, if you don't build them properly, as I said just now, you're going to have these flapping branches. When you have flapping branches in your brain, this is really unhealthy. It puts your brain into a stress mode, and your brain will start releasing stress chemicals. It'll start going into a stress state, which will impact on your intellectual and physical health. So those glial cells will go there and physically remove those branches. Now, if you have to prepare for a maths exam, for example, the next day, and you haven't processed your information, and your information is like this, those glial cells are still going to remove them. So you might think that you have this on your brain, but the chances are that you have that when you go and write the exam. So if I take you back a slide or two, you may listen, you may go into the exam situation, or the day before you go and learn your maths or your biology or your history or whatever it may be, and you build all your memories, but if you didn't process it correctly, those branches will be there, the information's there, but if it doesn't settle down and stabilize, the chances are that you will lose up to 35 to 75% while you are sleeping. But you don't know until you're in the exam. So you go into the exam thinking you've got that, but meanwhile you're sitting with that, and you only see it's gone into the dustbin, so you have recognition memory, but you don't have accessible memory. And that comes, and this is what's happening so much with students today. We work with students, thousands of students, and what happens with students, and if we're all honest, we've all done it, we cram learn. So we take that information and we cram it in 2 or 3 days before, and we read it and we regurgitate it, and we don't really think, because your brain is sophisticated enough to be able to take information, and through a bit of repetition, you can actually get it in your brain. But the problem is, you're going to build this, and that's unhealthy. It's just not every time you don't think properly, you're actually putting yourself under physical stress and intellectual strain. So it's really bad that students develop bad learning habits. It's really important that you teach children from very, very young how to use their brain properly. We've worked with children as young as 3, and my oldest client, and I love the story, was a gentleman of 78 who was a pilot, and his eyes were failing him, so he decided to go back and study again, and he wanted to become a chartered accountant. So at the age of 78, he went back into the field of studying, became a chartered accountant. He did a study course with our organization, and at 84 he qualified as a chartered accountant. Now that's what we should all be doing. The more you stimulate your brain, the more you develop your thinking skills, the more you're going to grow these branches, the more sophisticated your brain's going to become. There's no limit to what your potential will be in terms of using your brain correctly if you're thinking properly. So you want to basically make sure that you don't lose memories. So if you don't build your memories correctly, you can lose up to 35 to 75% of information while you are sleeping. So if we move on, this is also what it looks like inside the brain. Now we call the nerve cells, these nerve cells in the brain, we call the magic trees of the mind, because they look like trees. Now that is an actual slide of what it looks like inside the brain. And you can see it looks like trees, it looks like a forest. And if you have a look at that one down there, that's a nice strong memory, that's a good memory, that's a strong memory, that's a memory with lots of branches. What they've done is they've done research where they've taken obviously dead people, and they took one 5th-year medical student who had died, and they took a person who was a school dropout of exactly the same age, and what they did was they examined their brains, and what they found was that the school dropout had lots of this kind of pattern in their brain, but the university student had lots of that. So the evidence is that as you think and stimulate and learn, you're going to build a lot of that in your brain. And that is excellent, because the more of those you have in your brain, the brain works in such a way that the more you stimulate it, the better it gets. It matures with age. Maturity implies getting better with age, and that's what your brain will respond to. The more you use it, the more you get those branches, nice, thick, stabilized branches, the more intelligent you're actually becoming. Now that self-same memory over there, that could also be a toxic thought. So it could be a wonderful memory of information that you need to enhance your life, but it could also be a very strong memory of something negative. And that's what we would call a toxic or a negative stronghold. So if that is something, let's say, for example, you had an abuse, take the people that suffer from anorexia, anything negative, it will look similar to a positive memory. But there's a big difference. There is actually a difference. It will also be very thick and branched, but there's a difference, because the negative memory will actually have thorns on it, will look like a thorn tree. So the positive memory will look like a beautiful green lush tree, but the negative memory, the negative toxic stronghold, will actually have thorns growing on it. Now I'm going to go into that in a lot more detail in the next session, but I just want to quickly recap for you. The average person is using less than 0.001% of their brain for intellectual performance. Research has proven that if you can teach a person how to use their brain, you can increase that percentage by up to 6 to 8%. That may not sound like a lot, but Einstein only used 10. So if you can even use 1% of your brain, I can guarantee it's going to change the way in which you function. We are born with 200 trillion nerve cells. Now those two, by the time we are 2.5, you lose 100 trillion nerve cells. That extra 100 trillion nerve cells that you have in your brain are for the development in the womb, the birth process, learning to walk and talk. So by that, at the age of 2.5, we have what we call the terrible twos. And that's such a misnomer, because these poor little children, up until the age of 2, think that they're an appendage of the mother. They don't realize that they're actually independent. And it's at 2.5 that their brain goes through a major growth spurt, and they suddenly realize, hey, I'm not my mom's arm or leg or whatever, I'm actually me. And that's where they will experience a lot of fear, because they're still young, they can't actually explain this big wide world that they're suddenly in. And that's where suddenly you have a pruning of the 100 trillion nerve cells. There's a major change in the child's brain, and the terrible twos comes from that. So that it's not really the terrible twos, it's more the confused twos, because the best way to actually handle that situation is through physical touch, to bring them back into your space. And so if a child's having a tantrum, the quickest way to get rid of it is to bring them back into your physical space through touch. One nerve cell has the capacity to grow up to 70,000 branches, and we have around about 100 trillion nerve cells. Now, what is 70,000? To just give you some kind of tangible way of understanding that amount, it's about the amount of one grade 12 subject. So back in South Africa, grade 12 is our highest level. So we tell our grade 12 students that if you are going to pass grade 12, all you need to use is 14 nerve cells. Why 14? You've got 7 subjects, and each subject you can fit an entire subject on one set of nerve cells, because everything's built in duplicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Why is learning difficult? You only need 7 nerve cells to pass your highest level of education. If those nerve cells are working properly, if they've been built correctly, if they're integrated correctly, you can pass grade 12 using 14 nerve cells, 7 sets of nerve cells, which is absolutely phenomenal. So what it all boils down to is not how much of your brain you're using, but how you are actually building that nerve cell, how you are actually building, how you are actually thinking to grow that branch. This is unhealthy, it's toxic, it affects you. This is healthy. So we have to learn how to build that kind of memory. You have an infinite capacity for learning. You have 3 million years worth of space in your brain. Why 3 million years worth of space? Well, 1 Corinthians 13:12, I believe, gives us an indication. Now we see but a poor reflection in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Einstein, one of my heroes, he said, the quest to find consciousness, who we are, this thought thing, this mind thing, he in his quest, he said, I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are details. And that's so true, because if we can understand that we are made in God's image, if we can understand that we have the mind of Christ, because that's what it says in the Word of God, that you have the mind of Christ, never again can you turn around and say to yourself or think that you don't have a great mind, because you have the mind of Christ. You were created in God's image. So what we need to do is be on a quest to understand what are God's thoughts. If you look through the Word of God, especially Proverbs, it says there, get wisdom. It's not, would you like to have some wisdom today. It is get wisdom, get understanding. It's life, it's health. Go and look at all those scriptures there. Throughout the Word of God, we are instructed to get wisdom. We are instructed to think, meditate. We are instructed to learn, to use our mind, to use our brain. Current New Age approaches to releasing our potential are completely the opposite to what the Word of God says, because what they're saying is that to reach your potential, they'll say that you need to tap into the vast reserves of your brain, and the way to enter into this power within is through altered states of consciousness. Now, an altered state of consciousness means that you've actually got to lose control. It actually means that you've got to phase your mind out and lose control, whereas God says you should always be in control. You should be interactively meditating on the Word of God. So when we talk about meditation, we are talking about interactive thinking, using the organ that God has placed inside your brain that is completely phenomenal. You building dendrites that stay completely firmly attached to your brain, getting the two sides working together. That is hard work. You can't read a scripture from the Bible once and expect it to become rhema to you. You have to really think about that until it becomes part of who you are. And that is hard work. And the same thing with children going through school. It's not a passive situation of teacher tell, pupil listen. It's a situation of you actually need to listen. The student needs to take responsibility. The teacher and the parent are facilitators, are guiding the child, but the child has to realize that brain is inside their head. They've got to be able to build those nerve cells. They've got to be able to understand how to think and how to learn and to take that responsibility. Because as soon as we pass the buck, as soon as we start letting others do the thinking for us, we're going to actually have a problem. So what we need to do when we look for, when we in determining or trying to understand the thought process, we need to realize that it's a process of taking responsibility. It's a process of understanding that I need to get the two sides of my brain working together. I need to be able to build memories, left side detail to big picture, right side big picture to detail. I need to think hard in order to be able to attach those dendrites firmly. I need to be able to think and constantly develop my mind so that I can grow lots and lots and lots of nerve cells on the tree. And in doing that, I'm going to be using my brain more and more and more effectively, becoming healthier and healthier and healthier. Last thing I want to explain to you is that by last sort of biological fact, there's many biological facts, but for now, for you to understand, I've been going on about the two sides of the brain being able to work together, that they have to work together, and that the only way to get them to work together is through thinking. Now, inside the middle of your brain, you have a structure over here that joins the two sides of your brain. It's over there in the middle of your brain. It's called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum. It's about the size of this size, half of your thumb. But it's one of the most important structures in the brain. And the reason I say it's one of the most important structures in the brain, because that is your thinker. In other words, I've been going on and on and on about thinking and teaching you how to think properly so you can build good memories and not be toxic and use your brain correctly. Well, the part of your brain that does your thinking is your corpus callosum. It joins the two sides of the brain and it works with the other structures in your brain, but we call that your thinker because it actually does your thinking for you. Now, I said earlier on that I spent 11 years studying thinking, and thinking is three things. So let me leave you with this, and we're going to explore this in a lot more depth in the next session. Thinking is three things. Thinking is to ask, answer, and discuss. When you ask, answer, and discuss, you are making that corpus callosum come alive. You are literally switching on your brain. That corpus callosum is directly under your control. And it's like it's the soul. And it's literally under your control. And as you think, ask, answer, discuss, ask, answer, discuss, ask, answer, discuss. As you go through that process, you switch your brain on into another completely higher mode, the mode that it was designed for. And when your corpus callosum works, it brings the two sides of your brain together in synergy and in harmony, and we get this happening and not that happening. When the corpus callosum is working properly, you're going to get that kind of thing and not that kind of thing happening. So my challenge to you at the end of this first session is to really start learning how to think and really start learning how to use your corpus callosum. Thank you.
For more information on your body, His temple, write Life Outreach International, P.O. Box 98, 2000, Fort Worth, Texas 76182, or call the prayer line at 1-817-685-5000. You can also visit us on the web at lifetoday.org or at the following web addresses: